In Ragged Time, the first concert exclusively devoted to Southern ragtime music, featuring noted ragtime pianist Richard Zimmerman and the Etcetera String Band. From McComas Hall on the campus of Mississippi State University. Program 1 of our three-part series features authentic ragtime arrangements performed by Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you. I'm Richard Zimmerman, all the way from Grass Valley, California, and it is a real pleasure to be back here. It was only a year ago that I was here playing some ragtime, and it's wonderful to see so many of you back again. You were sitting over there last year, I believe, but that's all right. It's nice to see all of you. That was one of the many sounds of ragtime. Ragtime, as you know, was the first original American music. It swept across America around the turn of the century. It captivated the world. It changed the popular music of the world forever. And it's part of all of our modern popular music, rock, country, swing, whatever it is. But although ragtime was played and it was composed all over America, its roots were firmly here in the South. And this is a historic concert. And it is being documented because as far as I know, this is the very first concert ever to be devoted entirely to Southern ragtime. And ragtime, of course, is oftentimes associated with New York or Missouri or Chicago, but the roots are right here. And you're going to hear some things that you've never even dreamed existed. And it's really the roots of all American music, started right here, and in many cases, just not too many miles from where we are right now. Well, that little tune that you heard was a real sort of a folksy country tune, and it was from Texas. It was called That Texas Rag. It was written in 1916 by May Bell Watson. And yes, young ladies wrote ragtime, and they played it too. They wrote some very fine rags. That's an example of folk ragtime. But there were some very fine, serious ragtime composers who came out of the South. Scott Joplin was from Texas. He spent a lot of his early years there. And he went up to Missouri, and during the time that he was getting started and traveling around the Midwest, he met a young composer who wanted to write ragtime, and he gave him some advice. He said, "Percy," he said, "always play and compose the way you feel." And Scott Joplin did that. And in 1904, when the St. Louis World's Fair opened, I wonder what Scott Joplin's feelings were when he went to the fair and he saw the huge, impressive cascades, this huge series of brilliantly lighted waterfalls that they had as the theme of the fair. And he must have been so inspired that he wrote a beautiful rag, which is his interpretation in ragtime of these falls. As they cascaded down, they finally came to rest in a beautiful, placid lagoon. So I would like to now play for you this, and it captures the feeling of this. And you can almost imagine see these falls as they come cascading down. The Cascades by Scott Joplin. Speaking of Texas, in 1912, something happened in music that, again, changed music forever. It was the first time the blues were ever published. Now, of course, the blues were around for many, many years, but they were never actually written down and published as sheet music. And in 1912, almost simultaneously, blues appeared in a couple of parts of the country. One of them was Texas. And I'd like to give you an example of what one of these very early blues sounded like. As I say, they were ragtime. And before I go any further, probably some of you are saying, well, what's ragtime? Well, let me tell you, it's very simple. It's ragged time. And you might have heard that both of these tunes I just played, the melody had some kind of a catchy little snap to it. Well, ragtime simply accented what normally were the weak beats of the measure. That was called syncopation. And the beats that normally were not accented, they accented, which made you want to lift your feet and dance. And against that like a bass drum, steady march time against which the ragged left hand, right hand would play the melody. That was basically ragtime. And these early blues were songs, but they were also ragged. They had syncopation in them. And I'm going to play one of them for you now. And the blues as songs were sung very slowly sometimes, but when people got together and they wanted to dance, the orchestras would speed up the tempos and play them for dancing. So here is one of the very early ones, and you'll notice it's bluesy, but it's not really sad. It's more bittersweet. It's called the Dallas Blues. Didn't you detect just a little bit of the same feel as a lot of country music? That's what I mean. Some of the first country sounds were these very early ragtime blues. Well, there was a young man in Texas who came from Fort Worth, and when he was about 11 or 12, we're told, he decided to go into show business as a ragtime pianist. He went up to Kansas City, and he tried to make a living playing piano, which he did for a while. And when he was up there, he got the idea of writing a rag around 3 notes. It wasn't a very good idea. It didn't sound very good, but he kept working at this rag and kept plugging at it, improving it, and adding a few more parts to it. Years later, in 1915, he finally sold this rag to a Kansas City publisher for $50. Now, he never made another dime out of it, and he went on to become a poor fellow the rest of his life. He wrote some other rags, which he published. None of them were successful. And this rag that he sold outright for $50 went on to become the biggest money-making piece of ragtime in history. The publishers made millions. They never gave him another dollar for it. Well, a lot of people know this. You have heard this since you were children, and you might not have known who wrote it or anything about it. Most people regarded it as sort of a joke or a novelty song, but the way he played it and the way other ragtime pianists played it in the Midwest was very different, and it has been simplified over the years because it was very hard in its original form. But I thought you might like to hear how he played it and other pianists back then, and I think you'll agree with me, it's not a bad piece of music. So here for $50 is Uday Bowman's 12th Street Rag. Thank you. This is a great aerobic exercise to play ragtime, as you can see. You keeping fit without stairways and all these motorized things. Well, that was just some of the things happening in Texas. But what would happen if we looked in 1912? What was going on up in Memphis? There was a young black cornet player, band leader, by the name of W.C. Handy. And he, traveling around the South and Mississippi, he played around here, he heard a lot of the blues singing that was so prevalent, and he took some of these melodies and arranged them into a ragtime medley. And the very first of these he called the Memphis Blues. It was published in 1912, one of the very first blues, and it was subtitled A Southern Rag. And if you listen to this, it is a rag, although it has these sort of sad passing notes, which were called blue notes, that were usually not in music, but they were added by singers, and it gave a sort of a sad, wistful quality to whatever they did. So he took some of these blue melodies and made a medley, and you will hear them. This was an instrumental when it first came out. It was not a song. So here it is in its sort of original form, and then as it was played a little bit later on for dancing in a one-step version. Here we go, Memphis Blues. Thank you. Well, throughout the South, you had ragtime being played, folk ragtime and dance ragtime, all different kinds, and it was being published too, although not in great degree because there was just not that big of a market. Over in Thomasville, Georgia, there was a little publishing company called C.C. Cocroft, and that stood for Christopher Columbus Cocroft, and he had a music store there and published rags by N. Weldon Cocroft. Now, N. Weldon was really his wife, Nellie, but because she played the organ and the piano at the church and around town, she didn't think it was appropriate for a respectable young lady to be seen writing ragtime, so she did it under the pseudonym of N. Weldon to protect her good name. Percy Wenrick was from Joplin, Missouri, and although he later became a very successful composer of popular music in New York, he always remembered his boyhood days in Missouri, and he wrote songs that had that feel, the fun of being a child in Missouri, of the old home, of friends, and of experiences of his boyhood. So to close my little section, I'm going to play a medley of some of his ragtime songs. Some you know very well, others might be new for you. They're all ragtime of different styles. So here, Ragtime Hits by Percy Wenrick of Joplin, Missouri.
In parts 2 and 3 of Ragged Time, Mr. Zimmerman is joined by Robert Alt, Dennis Pash, and Kevin Saunders of the Etcetera String Band, and will visit a unique collection of ragtime era music and music-making machines.